Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of my interview series. We're starting to look more into Southeast Asia, and I'm excited to have Kelly Hazemans here with me to discuss some of this. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Ellie.
So I give a bit of introduction on Kelly. Kelly has a breadth of experience in e-commerce in Asia, not just Southeast Asia, but she started off working in China for many years with trade partners and brands, and now is based in Southeast Asia, working with brands across the region. She has hands-on experience with marketplaces like Tmall and also Southeast Asia's Lazada. And that's what really attracted me to bring her onto the podcast to discuss some of the differences between China and Southeast Asia. Thanks so much again.
Yeah, thank you. And hello from Phuket, from Thailand.
Nice. So I guess if we jump straight into it, you started off your career in Asia at Web2Asia, which is one of the bigger foreign-run trade partners in China. And what would be, three big lessons from your time there for brands that are looking at working with trade partners?
Yeah, so I started working at Web2Asia in 2014. I was very much a student of e-commerce back then. And a TP is a great way to learn and learn quickly about e-commerce. So yeah, I was working there, I was the account manager of several brands. And I think that the kind of learning experience I had myself, I think a lot of brands also go through because you're entering a new market. So there's a lot of things you can learn, like about the cultural differences, but also about how does the consumer behavior is different from, let's say, in your home market. So I think one of the big lessons for brands or working in a TP would be that it's very much, when you start working with a TP, it's very much a collaboration or a partnership, as the word says already. So that means it's really like a two-way interaction. And I think also a lot of the success of the brands depend on how much they are committed to, entering the market, but also in terms of communication and devotion they put into the collaboration with the TP. Because yeah, like I said, it's a learning process. There's so much you need to learn, but the TP also needs to learn a lot about the brand, because otherwise they will just interpret the brand the way they see it. And I think as a brand, you can do so much in terms of, giving some background about the brand, brand materials, yeah, like anything that can help the team in China or in Southeast Asia or anywhere outside your home market to understand the brand. So that would be one of the big lessons. And I think like with that, if you are like open to share and you can kind of expect the same of the TP, because I think, well, after I worked in the TP, I moved to work on the brand side. I was working in Mango. And then I was working with one of the biggest agencies in China, with Baozun, and working with them, like as a like in Mango, I was the head of e-commerce. So for me, it was very important to understand, okay, what is the thought process that has led to some kind of, or like the decisions they make or the recommendations they make. So in that sense, I think the second lesson is that transparency is very important. So you share the thought process, how they come to decisions. They provide a lot of background information. And also, as a data analyst, I always find it very important to have the data set so I can see, okay, what kind of data did they use? How did they make the analysis? So you can really understand, okay, how did they come to this kind of conclusion? And then ultimately, if you work in this way, I think then you also have like a good and trustful relationship And I think especially because you go to a new market, trust is very, very important, just to make sure you can rely on the TP, but also the TP can rely on the brand to make sure that they have the stock arriving on time. They have, some budget reserve to make sure that they can become activated in the market. So so I would say then, like, trust, transparency, and share and learn. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think that's something that brands do get maybe sometimes a bit wrong, because some brands are used to working with distributors, and obviously a distributor relationship is much more hands-off from a brand perspective versus a trade partner. A trade partner, you do have to be more hands-on, or you want to be more hands-on. I mean, that's
exactly.
That's one of the advantages of the model, right? You get to learn, the team gets to learn, you get to control, in theory, more of the direction. So I think that that is really, they're three really good points. I mean, do you think that, for smaller brands, Mango, you had a team in China, and obviously you're working with Baozun, so you had a big operation. But for smaller brands, maybe when you're in Web2 Asia, you worked with some smaller brands that no one's in the market. They're all at their home market, and they maybe don't have all the people to look at the data sets and things. Is there anything else? I mean, there's the trust and the partnership, so I suppose feeding them brand information, but is there anything else that smaller brands should consider, do you think?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I would say trust, definitely. Well, one thing I think it's important then, if you're considering smaller brands, like when you work with a TP, it's important then to also mention or to understand as a TP, what is the capability of the brand. So of course, a TP has its own goal. They want to activate your brand as soon as possible, and with the biggest budget possible. That would be always one way to activate a brand. But if you work with smaller brands, you have to understand then, okay, the TP has its own goal, so it may not be the right recommendation for you, or so you really have to look at your own capabilities, your own profitability. So if you have someone recommending, let's do a big live streaming show, or let's do 50% off on this project or this product, then you, as a brand, you really have to realize, okay, can I afford this? Is this possible? And if not, you can just say, okay, sorry, but this is not, we are not there yet, and maybe this is for a later stage, but now we would need something with a smaller budget, or, less big, and maybe more focused only on online, not so much offline, or
I think that makes sense. I think having someone in the brands, on the brand side, that can really push back and make sure even if you don't have someone that can a team that can fully analyze everything, but having someone that's really focused on working out, okay, is this the right thing for the brand at this stage? And having some understanding of the market, you want someone on the team that has some understanding of the market, or you have a third party that helps you to manage that, I think is important.
Exactly. Yeah. And even in Mango, it's a big company. They're very much focused on profitability, because the goal is not to enter and then leave within a few years. The goal is really to build a sustainable long-term presence. So with that, it takes time. And I think this is also, like, smaller or bigger brands, they have to realize, if you expand to a new market, it takes time before you get some popularity, or you gain some tracks, or you grow your brand. It takes time. So definitely be patient in that sense, for yourself as a brand, but also towards the TP, I would say.
Yeah, that's good advice. So if we're looking at, I think this is a question that everyone's very interested in, is you're looking at marketplaces in China and Southeast Asia, and people that listen to this will have listened to previous ones talking really about the China marketplaces. But if we're looking at China versus Southeast Asia, what would you say are the major differences brands should be aware of these major marketplaces?
Yeah. So if you talk about Southeast Asia, I think it's almost 10 countries together.
Sure.
So I definitely have more experience here of the market in Thailand. So, you know, this is the kind of experience I can share. But so for when I just moved here and started using and working with the platforms, the biggest difference is, I would say, like how sophisticated the platforms are, the e-com platforms. And I think that all has to do with the size. I looked up some numbers, but so if you look at the online retail sales in Southeast Asia, it's close to 100 billion. And if you look at the online retail sales in China, it's almost 1 trillion. So that's 10 times bigger. And this is for the whole region of Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So definitely the size is one of the biggest differences.
But that also, just stop you there. I mean, there is enormous growth potential for Southeast Asia.
Exactly. So that is bringing me to my second point, because here they are still projecting a lot of growth, like 10 to 20% in the coming years. So because it's still very much in a developing stage, the entry requirements are much lower compared to China. It's actually also cheaper to open a store here. So in that sense, there's a lot of opportunity, especially for smaller brands or medium-sized brands, because there are just not that many brands here on the market. And I think it's always good to be one of the first, so you can benefit from that as the countries and as the platforms develop. So yeah, I think that would be the biggest difference. And then I think also, if you look at the marketplaces in China, they are very much closed environments. They don't allow any integration with other websites or companies. Whereas here you see, for example, Lazada, Shopee, they're all integrated with Facebook, so you can also promote your products outside their marketplace. They also have affiliates, you know, outside the platform. So yeah, it kind of really suits well within like the current, or let's say the more Western channels that are available. Whereas in China, you have a lot of native applications, a lot of native like only in China kind of platforms, where here you see it's much more open and yeah, very diverse, I would say, as well.
And it's still at that stage. I mean, it's very competitive between the different platforms. So I mean, if you look regionally, Shopee and Lazada are at the top rankings in terms of they're across the most markets. But then Indonesia, who's the biggest in terms of population anyway, has Tokopedia, which is not really in the other markets. So it's all, I think there's a lot of potential shakeups to happen in the future, in the coming years with that.
Yeah, exactly. I think also there is also a lot of overlap. If you look, for example, at as the two you mentioned, Lazada, Shopee, they do a lot to make customers move to their platforms. And for example, that's another big difference. You still in Southeast Asia, you have cash on delivery. Now some platforms also offer you can pay afterwards, or you can pay in terms. So this is definitely also a difference, because in China you have either Alipay or WeChat Pay, or you just pay with your bank account. Here you can also transfer money. So there are a lot of payment options, just to make sure that people get used to shopping online and make it very accessible for everybody.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I always think is that these platforms and the market level of sophistication, to your first point, is about 5-10 years behind where China is. And I think it's also not just the front end or not just the consumer behavior, it's also the back end in terms of the logistics and the delivery structures. I think that's also much less centralized. And of course, because it's multiple markets as well. But a lot of these markets are very fragmented and they don't have the same logistic setups that China has. So I think that's also something that brands need to consider. It's quite complex still.
Yeah, there are a lot of delivery services that you can choose. So if I order something from Lazada, one day it comes with Flash Express, the other day it comes with another courier. So yeah, there are a lot of different options, but that also means the market is still free and open for competition, among couriers and among platforms. So yeah, it's definitely open and yeah.
No, lots of opportunity. And then what about like activation costs? I think you mentioned a bit before about it being less expensive generally in Southeast Asia, but Tmall on-site marketing and live streaming is something that I work with brands a lot on, and of course it takes up quite a lot of budget, obviously depending also who you're live streaming with. But how are you seeing this in the major platforms in Southeast Asia? How are the activation costs different?
Well, just the startup costs are lower. For example, you don't have to pay a deposit, whereas on Tmall, I think it starts from 100,000 RMB deposit, right? So that is already a big difference. And in terms of sales, it's like up to 5% commission. Also, if you want to join promotions, I think there's also a maximum in terms of commission they ask for joining promotions. And sometimes there's some stunting with price, but you often still see like they make 1 Thai baht less in terms of price difference. So I think it's in that sense a bit less aggressive. But if you want to activate your brand, I think like for any brand, I would always say like, okay, you have to spend at least some, like, let's say 50% of your budget on activating your brand either inside or outside the marketplace, but also work on or spend budget on conversion, which is more inside the platform. And I think that's more like a general rule that applies to any market. And well, yeah, it's always a bit difficult to say how much it actually costs because it also depends on the category and like the size of the platform or anything. But I would say it's like, make sure that, like, personally, I always look at the whole picture of a brand. It's not only, okay, you invest in one place. No, you also have to invest very much in creating a brand, making sure that people are aware of your brand. And then when they start their search about products and learn about your products, which is very much inside the platform, then you have to make sure that you are actually on the first page of the search results. So you also have to invest in keyword search or display banners. So, any market you go to, I think you have to, reserve budget for that. And in terms of live streaming now, I think it's definitely also still developing. It's still a bit awkward to look at here because it's not so professional yet. And I think also for local people, it's a bit awkward. They're not used to being on camera or hosting these long shows. Because in China, it's very much every day, the whole day. Or you have like these celebrities or big KOLs, or they're actually live stream KOLs, which is like a niche kind of influencer, of course. But that I haven't seen here yet. I think it's still very much occasionally that there is like a live streaming, not so professional yet. But like, I'm personally very much an advocate of live streaming. I think it's amazing because you kind of create this online experience, or like, let's say offline experience online, because you can see the product from every angle. yes, you cannot touch it, but at least they show a lot more details than just the pictures that you see on the website.
Mm.
So I think it's great. It's just like people have to get used to it. In China, I think it took almost 3 years, to become as a norm, standard. And if you look at how they're doing it now in China, it's almost becoming this big show, big impulse buying show, which in the end is also not uh, great for conversion. I mean, people will buy, but then they actually realize,
Repeat purchase is a problem. Loyalty is a problem. There's the depth of the discounts is a problem. I mean, there are lots of problems, but it is definitely an essential part of the mix in China. You can't get away from it. I mean, it's very difficult.
Exactly.
You and I would both advise most brands, to go through the live streaming route in China. And I think Southeast Asia, I agree with you. It's obviously not as mature. It's still, but I think it'll probably catch on pretty quickly, because there's a model in China that they're looking at, and that's something we haven't touched on, and people may know or may not. But Lazada is heavily invested. A lot of these platforms are heavily invested by Chinese companies like Alibaba. So
exactly, yeah.
So there's a lot of influence, and there should be more learning. And I think back to that point about the sophistication, just from a user perspective, the search on these platforms is nowhere near as good as Tmall yet. And it's quite frustrating for someone that has used Tmall, but I feel like that is all to come. Those optimizations should come quickly, which will just make more people willing to spend and buy on these platforms. So I think it's all going in the right direction.
Exactly. Well, when I just moved here, coming from China, like being used to having this very fast delivery and super algorithm that recommends you all kinds of great products, and having these live streaming shows. Moving here to Thailand, it was definitely a bit of a change, because you do have to wait a bit longer for your products arrive. You also see less customer reviews. I think so. The platforms have to develop, but also the customer behavior. And I think, of course, these platforms are doing everything to make that happen, and they make it very easy to shop online. And then being one of the first brands here, I think that's always a good moment to enter the market, let's say.
For sure. And I think a lot of brands that are now entering China wish they did it 5 years ago, because it would have been much easier to get the sales.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it feels hard no matter what stage it's at, but definitely Southeast Asia now, there's a good opportunity for a lot of brands in a lot of categories. So yeah. So the other thing I think I wanted to ask you about, which is interesting compared to China, is how do you see the role of websites like brands.com sites in Southeast Asia? Because in China, that's something that most brands have not done. A lot of brands have not done. I think in the fashion space, maybe more brands, but in beauty, very few brands have their .com sites. They rely on the marketplaces. So how do you see that for Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it's true that in China, I think the go-to strategy was like you go directly to Tmall, or nowadays maybe some brands they go straight to TikTok, to Douyin. So it's true, like the .com is not really existing, or not that developed yet or so strong. But here, I think first you had the .com, and then the platforms came. So the how do you say, the timeline is a bit different. And for sure, I think in China, people would want to have their .com to be stronger, just because it's so much more profitable and you can make up your own rules. So here, I think brands are definitely focusing still on .com. And being outside of China, there's also Facebook, you have Instagram, Google, of course. So there are a lot of different platforms where you can either direct to your .com website or to your Lazada or Shopee store. But I think because of the profitability, and it's still very much important, or it's still important. And also because there's still some doubt and mistrust about the platforms, because sometimes they're fake. And if you have your own website, at least customers will know, okay, it's 100% authentic. This is the brand website, so it must be 100% authentic and real. So that definitely helps to establish yourself as a international brand, like it's really shipped from abroad and imported to Southeast Asia. So this can really help to establish yourself as an authentic brand.
Yeah,
more than
I
in a
think that's
marketplace.
something that is just easier in Southeast Asia is the fact that most of the, and we touched on this already, but most of the platforms and in terms of marketing platforms are the same as the West. So you've got Facebook and Instagram. Of course, you have Line and you have WeChat to a certain extent as well in certain markets, but it's more accessible for brands, or more easily sort of understandable. And I think, yes, to your point, any brand would prefer to have their own traffic coming to their own site that they can analyze and look at. But I still think that the marketplaces are only going to get stronger. It's a pure convenience thing for consumers. And of course, they make the shipping easier. There's different options. They subsidize it in certain ways, so it's cheaper. There's a lot of advantages to that. I think one thing from my perspective that the platforms need to get right is they need to be better for their customers. So they are like China, the customer is basically always right in these situations, and you get a refund at the drop of a hat or whatever it is. Whereas in Southeast Asia, certainly in Indonesia, that's not the case at the moment. It's still more in the merchant's favor, but that will change as well. And as that changes and it becomes very even easier for consumers to purchase, they will gravitate more to these marketplaces. So whilst I think .com is I think if you can have it there available for people to get that information, but expect the sales to continue to be stronger start to be stronger on the platforms.
Yeah, it's true. Like I know brands, they are just on the marketplaces because of the convenience, and especially because of the payment methods I mentioned earlier. Because if you have your own .com website, you may not have all the technology to make customers pay afterwards, or pay in terms or in parts. So, and I think now also customers are getting more and more touch points, so they will look for you on the marketplace and then see, okay, what's the price here, or how can I collect points here? What is the best way for me, and more, let's say the most affordable way to shop. So then I think it's just good to be kind of everywhere, including marketplaces and .com.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess to end, what are a couple of pieces of advice for brands expanding into Southeast Asia from an e-commerce perspective?
Some pieces of advice, I would say, I think if you enter the market here, you may, you still need, you need to invest quite heavily in the customer service, because I think the customer here, a bit similar to China, like they love to bargain, or they want to have the price difference returned to them. They are quite savvy in that sense. Like they will look, where is the discount, and why is it not being offered here? Or they will say, okay, I have my Shopee points, I would like to use them. Is it possible to pay, on this platform rather than the other one, or the .com? So there's still a lot of interaction with the customer service, also to make sure, especially if you are a foreign brand, to understand, is this real? So you can show, okay, we are 100% authentic. Maybe they will ask for certificates or anything. So a lot of the conversion is still driven by the customer service. And that's just really important, I think, in the whole of Asia. And then I think another good advice is, like, you have to, of course, focus on the local language, to offer services in the local languages. Here, for example, it's Thai, but there's also some demand for English languages. So you have multiple languages within one country. I think that's also important to realize that, of course, the brand materials need to be translated. to local language. And I think another point is that still, because e-commerce in general is so labor intensive, a lot of the cost will go through staffing, having a team, or having someone to help you with the operational part of launching your brand on e-commerce platforms. I think still a big share of the cost will go to staff or operational work. And yeah, so I think, well, and another thing is, like, if you also have to, if you have to ship your products to a new country, you have to understand, okay, how will this affect my cash flow? Because you do have to make sure you have some budget reserved for activating your brand, for marketing. And of course, if you have to ship big loads or containers, like, this will heavily affect your cash flow, of course, especially if you're a bit smaller brand. So yeah, you have to think strategically about that. How can you keep the cash flow going and maintain your stock levels at the same time?
Yeah, I think they're all really, really good pieces of advice. I think the customer service one is something that is very different versus Western markets. I mean, I've forgotten the statistic now, but the percentage of sales that need to be assisted by customer service in China is huge. Like, it's way over. Everyone wants to have a little conversation about something. To your point, either it's how does that look, or is that cat, like, very minor details, but it's really essential. And obviously, if you have a trade partner, then they will manage that for you. But it's equipping their team, back to the original point, equipping the team with enough information about the brands, about the products, for them to be able to answer convincingly. I think that's a really good point. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like this, just to get this assurance that, okay, there is someone, they can help me, it's authentic, and sometimes the coupons are also that they are that the platforms provide are so complicated. They just want to make sure, okay, it's working. This is the like, can I even get more discount? And still, there's shipping fees you need to pay for. So yeah, if you can, even a small discount is something worth trying for.
Absolutely. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for this. It was great discussion, and I think it should definitely help brands that are looking at Southeast Asia as an opportunity. And I know that you work with brands from an operational perspective in the market on the e-commerce side. So I will obviously put your details below, and people can connect with you on LinkedIn if they want to find out more about what you're up to. So thanks again.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we could have extended much more. I think it's great to talk about, and Southeast Asia is definitely upcoming. So yeah, if they like to learn more, they can either look on my website from iBoost online, or check my profile on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and share more details.
Super. I'll add both of those below in the notes. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a nice day.